I read a comment a couple of weeks ago from a gentleman. He was getting on up in age, but he was wondering if he should sell off his firearms collection or leave them to his relatives. And that comment just really struck home with me and for myself. I know that day's waiting for me off into the future, hopefully many decades from now, but it's waiting. That day when I'm physically not able to use my firearms anymore. All right, so then I'm going to have a similar decision to make. And that's if I live that long. All right, none of us are promised tomorrow, and then something still has to be done with my firearms. They say I can't take them with me. I've been trying to figure out how. I told Mrs. River I want a Viking funeral, complete with the boat and the flaming arrow and everything. She didn't see the humor in that. So yeah, something's going to have to be done with my firearms one day. Yeah. So, and it isn't just me, and it isn't just that gentleman asking that question. It's every single one of us. Yeah, this topic's bigger than us all. And passing things on, that is very important, because it just might be the last thing any of us ever do that actually impacts the life of someone else. So yeah, this is something we needed to talk about regardless of your situation also, because we never know, none of us, we never know what the future holds for us. I purchased this particular Winchester Model 70 Featherweight, made in 1960, from a local gun shop, and I told that whole story in the video, Oops, I Bought Another Rifle. But after I purchased it, I learned that it had belonged to someone I knew, Mr. Howard. And Mr. Howard had an extensive firearm collection, and he had excellent taste in firearms, and he had an impressive collection. Well, he was planning on leaving that collection to his son Mike, who I also knew, was a friend of mine and someone I looked up to. Well, Mike, sadly, he passed away from cancer a few years ago. It was sudden. And anyway, so that completely changed things for Mr. Howard. Mr. Howard, he's getting on up in age and developed some serious health problems. So he decided to sell his collection. So none of us know what the future holds for us. And my Uncle Lynn, that I've talked about many times before, someone who was a big influence on me growing up, he was a gun person, and I loved talking guns with him. Well, he passed away some years ago, and he had a pretty nice collection himself. Well, my cousins, his children, they just weren't into firearms. Good people, they just weren't into firearms. So when he passed away, they didn't know anything about his gun collection. They didn't know what rifle it was a piece of junk that he picked up for $50 at a gun show just to have something to tinker with or for parts, or which ones were their true family heirlooms, like his grandfather's early Winchester Model 94 lever action chambered in .32 Winchester Special with a half-round, half-octagon barrel, or P38, Walter P38, that's in his collection, that had belonged to his father, JT. And JT brought that back from Europe during World War II. My cousins didn't know any of that. Now, they knew the firearms had a monetary value. We all know that. Firearms are a liquid asset, meaning they can easily be converted to cash or liquidated. And keep in mind, cash has no value. It's absolutely worthless. This is good for nothing. Absolutely nothing. The only value this has is that we can trade it for things of actual value. Things like a firearm, or land, a home, food. That's the only purpose this serves, is to get things of value with it. And those of us that really love our guns, We know our firearms have a value that exceeds their monetary value. That's why we buy them. That's why we trade our cash for these, because these are more valuable. Okay, well, my cousins, they knew that my uncle's collection had monetary value, but they didn't know about the truly valuable things, the history of those firearms. So they didn't know that Walter P38 that I mentioned. They didn't know that JT, their grandfather, when he was in Europe in World War II, he stepped out of a tunnel one day, and as soon as he walked out of that tunnel, a German officer put that pistol to his head and pulled the trigger, and it went snap. Misfire. Now you can imagine what happened after that, since JT brought the pistol home with him, but that's important family history there, and it was almost lost. Right. Now, fortunately, because of the countless hours I'd spent with my Uncle Lynn talking all things guns, I was able to tell them all that and which firearm was which and so forth. And for me personally, I think the most valuable thing of any of that for me was all those hours we spent just talking all things guns. And I do miss those conversations. But anyway, so they almost lost that history. And that would have been a shame, because once history like that on a firearm's lost, it's gone. There's no getting that back. And so, yeah, they wrote it all down, and they do know now. You know, and with all that in mind, I want every one of you that have a firearm, that regardless of your situation, if you've got a firearm that has value beyond its monetary value, I want you to pull out a piece of paper and I want you to write down every single thing about that firearm. Everything. When did you buy it? Where did you buy it? How much was it? And I don't care if it's a family heirloom, if it is, write down the family history, or if it's a rifle you bought 20 years ago or you bought 20 minutes ago. Write down everything about it. Is it your favorite rifle? If so, why? Is it the worst rifle you've ever owned? If so, why? Write it all down, because that's the valuable stuff. That's what we don't want to lose. And I think at the end of the day, is when it comes to passing things on, and I don't care what we're talking about here, we're talking about firearms at the moment, but this applies to everything. So land, homes, anything we're going to leave to others that we value. Grandma's butter churn. If we truly value it, we need to write it down, because we all want our stuff to go to someone ultimately that's going to value it like we do. They're going to appreciate it and value it. I think that's really all any of us wants for our stuff. Well, people can't value something they don't know anything about. The only way they're going to learn about it is if you either tell them or you write it down. And again, because of all the uncertainties of life, we never know how the future is going to end up. So write it down. And for myself, anytime I purchase a firearm, I ask about the history of it. This Winchester here, when I bought it from that gun shop, they were selling it on consignment. I had no idea about the history of this rifle, but I always ask. Now, they couldn't tell me for privacy reasons, so I asked the gun shop if they would give the owner, the seller of this firearm, my phone number and have him contact me, so I could ask about the history of it. And I purchased this rifle and got home, and less than an hour later my phone rang, and it was Mr. Howard. And I did enjoy talking with him and hearing his voice again. I hadn't seen him in a long time. And I knew Mr. Howard, I knew Mike, his son, But I also knew Mr. Howard because he was my Uncle Lynn's boss for many, many, many years. This was back when people worked most of their life at one place. And the people that worked together, they were like family. So I'd known Mr. Howard my whole life just because of my Uncle Lynn. That was good talking to him again, and that was, for me, that meant something, knowing this was his rifle. And it was going to go to Mike, but, given the circumstances. So just knowing the history on this rifle, for me, was important. Ask. And my latest rifle here, this Winchester Model 70 featherweight, another featherweight, chambered in 257 Roberts. I recently purchased it, did a video on this one. I bought it online, Gunbroker. Well, when I was communicating with the seller as far as for information and so forth, I asked the seller about it, the information on this rifle, its history. Well, what I can tell you is that back when this rifle came out, it was actually 2012, not 13. We'll talk about that later. But so when this came out in 2012, a father and son, they went and bought matching rifles, special edition Winchesters, from Lipsy's in Louisiana. Well, this one belonged to the father. He's on up in age now, and I actually bought the rifle from the son. Okay, that means something. Now, I don't know either one of them, but, it means something to me. Ask. And then write all that information down. Okay, now, while you're writing, write down what you want done with the firearm if something does happen to you. All right, do you want your firearms liquidated? And if you do, write down approximately what's it worth. Just ballpark. So your widow or whoever has an idea. Or write down who you want it to go to if you want it to go to someone. All right, and we all know those family members that they just going to come in and try to take everything. And we've all heard those horror stories about someone passes and then their friend or somebody else comes in and they end up getting the gun collection from the widow for next to nothing, ripped her off, and all that good stuff. Well, folks, I know that happens, but that's rare. I mean, seriously, it's rare. What happens more often than not is this stuff just don't go where we want it to go. All right. My friend Joey, and he would have been here today, except for he just had a little procedure done. But he can tell you all about that if he chooses. All right, well, Joey and I, we had a really, really close friend, Russell, and Russell passed away. And Russell had a different perspective on death. His father had passed when he was really young, and Russell was more aware of our mortality than most of us. Well, Russell had absolutely no problem whatsoever walking up to you saying, hey, if you die, I want that. That was just Russell. But Russell also absolutely had no problem saying, hey, if I die, I want this to go to you. And he had a shotgun that Joey really liked, and he told Joey, hey, if something happens to me, I want this to go to you. Well, Russell passed away. Okay, but Russell never said anything to anyone else, never wrote it down. Well, that just created a really awkward situation for Joey. Joey and Russell, close friends. But Joey just couldn't go up to Russell's widow and say, hey, I want that. I mean, seriously. When is it a good time to go up to somebody's widow and say, hey, I want that? Before the funeral? After the funeral? After she's finally getting over what happened and is starting to move on with her life? there just ain't ever a good time to go up to a widow or family members of someone that passed and say, hey, I want that. Or they left it to me. And so Joey ended up just never saying anything. Just like I never said anything about my stuff that Russell had that he had borrowed and still had it when he passed, just it was too awkward. And then my Uncle Ian, when he passed, okay, I went through all his firearms and told my cousins which ones were which. Well, my aunt, she said I could have one of his firearms. All right, but it was a really awkward situation because I forget how she worded it, and she was extremely polite, but she made it, clear I couldn't have one of the special ones. All right, and I understand completely that those were for my cousins. Yeah, my uncle, he meant the world to me, but for my cousins, that was their father. All right, so she wanted to make sure those special ones went to them. And I understand it because I felt the same way. I thought that they should go to them also. But then the ones that were special, like his favorite deer rifle and so forth, the firearms that really meant something to me, and keep in mind I knew which ones he couldn't care less about because I knew his collection, were the ones that were special for whatever reason to me, were the ones that were special to him. I ended up telling her I just didn't want any of them, that I felt like they all needed to stay together in his collection. Because, it was just an awkward situation. And yeah, there's several of them that were meaningful to me. But okay, and I do feel like my Uncle Ian would have wanted me to have one of them, but he never said which one. So, write it down. Write down that history. Write down your experiences, when you got it, everything you know about that firearm. And for myself, I've got a notebook in the house where I keep all my load data for load testing for firearms and so forth. I've got the very first page, I keep it sectioned off by rifle, and the very first page is just everything I have on that firearm, know about it, the history of it, when I bought it, what it means to me, the serial number, you name it, it's there, model, everything. And that's not just for passing it on, but also if my firearms are stolen one day, I've got the serial number and the information on it. As a matter of fact, I'm probably going to start keeping a flash drive in there and go ahead and take pictures of all my firearms. So I've got that to go with the other information just in case they are stolen one day. And I keep them in a safe, but there's ways around that. So record all that information and make sure the most valuable part of all, the history of the firearms you have, the parts that can never be replaced once lost, make sure that's written down for someone else in the future. So this Winchester Model 70 Featherweight 257 Roberts here, it had a home. It had a place it belonged. It was part of a matching father and son set. But we don't last, even though our things often do. Now it's got a new home. Well, it's up to me to take this rifle into the field, and to the range, and add a new chapter to the history of this rifle. Just like I'm going to add a new chapter to the history of this Model 70 Featherweight here, the Pre-64. All right, so history is important stuff. And I talked about this on the other channel and recently on a video on Independence Day. History is what makes things valuable to us. It gives things context and meaning. So history is important. We need to know it. But history doesn't end when we acquire something. It's up to us to take every chance we get while we're here on God's green earth and enjoy every minute, and with our firearms to take them to the range and into the field hunting every chance we get, and to write our own chapters to add to the history of those firearms. And then make sure we write it down so that we can pass that history on to others. I hope this gave y'all something serious to think about. I hate talking about stuff that ain't positive, but it's some stuff that needs to be said. God bless and have a wonderful day.